A knight is sworn to valor. His heart knows only virtue. His blade defends the helpless. His might upholds the weak. His word speaks only truth. His wrath undoes the wicked.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to 2 Hours on a Sunday. I'm Nick.
And I'm Brian. And today we are talking about a 1996 classic, Dragonheart. And for me, this movie holds a lot of nostalgia because I've watched this many times. I have the old VHS that I ran into the ground
Still works.
This on loop. It still works. All my VHSs work. I took care of them.
Good.
But you have never seen this movie.
Never. Now, I honestly heard about it, probably thought people were talking about that movie with Mel Gibson. Oh, Braveheart. And I never watched this one once. So it was definitely an interesting viewing experience for me because I had no ideas. All I knew was the cover. I didn't know what Draco looked like. I had no idea who was actually in the movie. So everything was pretty much a surprise.
And this movie, I don't know if you know, was very popular because it spawned 5 sequels.
That's right. After I watched the movie, I saw it was like 2, 3, and 2017, and then a 2022 movie, right? Or 2020.
The second one, I've seen the second one as a child.
Yeah.
And it's okay, but none of them are even close to the first. Like, I feel like movies like this in the 90s, when they made sequels, none of the sequels ever held up to what the original was.
It doesn't have the same magnitude or spectacle that the first one did. And I think there were a lot of really cool aspects of this movie, like the visual effects, the practical effects. Everything was really great for a 96 essentially kids fantasy movie. It wasn't something like thrown together. I think there was a lot of care put into it.
And I think they had a lot of help in that regard when it comes to practical versus special effects because Jurassic Park had come out 3 years prior. So directors and special effects artists, they kind of got a grasp of how to use practical effects to mix it well with CG because Jurassic Park was flawless in its time of 1993.
Yep.
So they had a lot of reference when it comes to making it right.
Exactly. Yeah. They had the daytime shots. They had the nighttime shots. They had shots where it was raining in water. They had a good foundation to work off of. There was one scene in particular. I'll talk about it right now since we're on the topic of like visual effects.
Right.
The scene where essentially Dennis Quaid and Draco are kind of at an impasse. Draco wants to kind of put a stop to King Einan's tyranny, and Bowen, Dennis Quaid's character, doesn't really want to fight. I think that's what it was. It's near the end. They're kind of in that circle at the old ruins. And there's a shot where Draco comes into like focus. It's just his head. And I didn't rewatch it because I wanted to just hear from you. Was that practical?
See, there wasn't bonus feature. I watched the remastered 4K.
Okay.
And let me tell you, this movie looked crispy in 4K.
Yeah, I bet.
But you can tell some scenes, they use a lot of practical dragons.
Yeah.
Like whenever, like his hand, when it was on Bowen, and practical when he was in his mouth, and they're one-on-one.
Yes.
That was the whole practical jaw. So I think that had to have been a practical head because they must have taken what Jurassic Park did with the practical T-Rex and kind of blended it together because I think some shots, his head is practical.
Yeah, because I looked at him like I had to do a double take because it was so realistic. And I know lighting and rain is hard just in general. Like I wouldn't be able to do it, but it looked so good compared to other shots throughout the movie. So I'm like, it has to be, or they just had a lot of budget for that one particular scene.
You can't beat practical effects. And I think the 90s mixed it way too well to where now when we see overdone special effects, it's not real.
Yeah.
We know it's not real. And I think what helps the dragon in terms of fire, they had real fire in this entire movie.
Yes.
Anytime he did something with fire, it was like a flamethrower they set off or like explosions or like they had streams of fire for when they did battle.
that one in the field that they set off like the string of explosions, I was like,
Yeah.
yes,
Yes.
it reminded me of like the Rundown
Yeah.
with the right how they had all those big practical explosions. It just looks so cool.
Right. And then they had, anytime he'd walk through the grass or there'd be something, they'd like do an air pocket and then like grass would shoot up. You know, when he would like stomp around and they were fighting, they just have stuff flying around.
Yes.
To really build him into the scene.
Now, how did they do? So he blew fire out of his nostrils. How did they do that? Did they have?
Well, he did both. He breathed fire through his mouth, and then whenever he wanted to, he would like, you know,
yeah, he did like the close a nostril, or he did like
one
short
nostril and shoot
bursts. It. Yeah,
yeah.
I think
that was a mix of practical and, because whenever it was on him, I think that was kind of a mix of CG fire. And then when it hit the spot where Bowen was, it would be like they would light it.
Yeah,
like the campfire, they would light it with a real fire.
There was one where he shot like 2 nose blasts at the castle, and it looked like honestly big charges that they actually shot, and then it exploded the wall. I was like,
probably,
holy moly, that's cool.
Because to do it right back then, you had to do everything real.
Exactly,
everything had to be practical.
Yeah, you didn't have stone physics back then.
No.
You didn't know crumbling bricks.
Your budget was the CG dragon, so you had to do everything for real.
Yep. Exactly.
And all the horseback, all the set design, the clothing.
Yeah.
It really helped immerse the audience in the journey that was 984 AD.
Yes.
In the knight's time.
Yeah. So give me your opinion on the design of Draco.
Draco is my favorite dragon.
Yeah, okay.
I think it's not like, so we have other dragons in live action and say dragons like Toothless and animated versions. But if we're talking about live action, Draco is my absolute favorite. Because there's Saphira and Aragon, which she has a nice blue emerald essence to her, and she's very mystical.
Yes.
But Draco is the classic, what you would think a dragon would look like. But he has the charm that Sean Connery brought to him.
Yeah.
And like his overall build, his face in general, I just love the horns and the thick face and jaw with the 4. I like dragons with 4 legs with wings. Wyverns are cool with the ones that their wings are attached to their 2 arms.
Yeah.
But I just love the essence of how Draco looks.
Like the English dragon.
Yeah, the old English dragon.
I will mostly agree with you. I feel like the only thing I didn't really care for was the size of the snout, but I think they did that on purpose because they had to articulate lips. And
they had to make him speak.
Exactly. And it would have looked probably at that time real goofy if he had like a big, long snout. But other than that, yeah, I love the horns. I liked the scales too. They were quite big. They weren't like the, tiny little scales like a lizard would have,
especially down his torso, right? When he would lift it up to show his heart. It's so cool.
That was a cool shot. I like that when they did that. And yeah, definitely, I think Sean Connery was one of the best parts of that movie.
The back and forth between him and Bowen.
Yeah. I guess getting into the story, I like the dynamic of a essentially dragon hunter befriending a dragon.
Yeah, a dragon slayer.
Dragon Slayer, you're right, because he did slay dragons. He did. Yeah, it made for a good companionship, essentially, between the two.
And for those of you who haven't seen the movie, the movie starts off with the king's son, Einan. They're doing battle with the village people, and he gets attacked from behind and gets stabbed through the chest. So the queen and Bowen take Einan to the palace of the dragons. Where Draco lives. And there's an old ritual where a dragon would take part of his own heart to restore life to a king, in which that happens. And then there's twists and turns later on that we eventually find out as an audience. So
a couple of big things to note about this. The time period, 983 AD, right?
I think it's 84.
984. So it's a long time ago.
Yeah.
It doesn't really state where we are, but based on the characterization of people we're dealing with, or like the time period, we're dealing with Saxons. So this is where we would essentially be in modern day Germany. But the queen, so Einan's mother, would have been a Celt. So she was from like the United Kingdom area, Ireland, and she essentially brought over all of the traditions of like revering dragons, whereas the Germanic people or the Saxons didn't have that. So there was this kind of back and forth at the beginning of, should the queen invoke this, Dragonheart sharing thing? Or because Bowen was like, I don't know if this is a good idea, right? At the beginning.
Right.
Another thing to bring up about this is Einan's father, the king, was like a tyrant. So he wasn't a good king. And Bowen was Prince Einan's, what would you call him? Like guard,
He was his
steward, teacher. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bowen was Prince Einan's teacher
Of the old code.
Yeah. So he's teaching him how to be an honorable fighter person in general.
Where his father is not.
Right. So he essentially dedicated his entire life to teach Einan to be a good person. And as we get on with the story, we find out that he's not that at all.
Right.
He's
very much his father.
Exactly. With half the heart of a dragon.
Yes. Which makes him somewhat immortal.
Right. Do you think that, if you kind of pick it apart a little bit more, that ritual could have like intensified what was actually in his heart to begin with, like the tyranny and the wickedness, even though Draco's heart is, pure?
Like if they were to give us more of that scene to really dive into, I think they could have, but I think that spoils later on.
Right.
Because we get the conversation between Draco and Bowen. Once Bowen finds out it was that dragon who gave him the heart. And he said, well, I thought he foresaw the tyranny within Einan, but I thought my heart could change that. So I think that would spoil the front, but then it would also make the beginning a little longer than it needed to be.
That's true.
I think you just needed to get there.
Yeah.
Show that this procedure of a dragon bestowing his heart upon a future king.
Yeah.
And then move on with the movie.
Right. And I think they did a good job with that.
Because you saw the tyranny right after.
Yeah.
After he was healed, he looked at his right-hand man and said, we're going to rebuild this castle. But he was more sinister when he said it.
Yeah.
He wasn't like grateful that he's still alive because of, he swore to this dragon, but he didn't really care because he's his father's son.
Yeah. And all he wants is more power and prestige and having a big castle. I liked the jump in time. So we had the initial actor playing Einan, and then we jump pretty much right away to seeing David Thewlis as King Einan.
He's an amazing villain.
He's so good. He's so good at everything he does.
And what's funny is because after Harry Potter, but as a child, I didn't know Harry Potter then. So when I went back to watch it a couple years ago, I was like, hey.
Yeah. And then similarly, his right-hand man.
Isaacs.
Exactly. Lucius Malfoy. So it's cool to see everybody, or a lot of actors we grew up with later on in earlier movies.
Right. And they still crush it in earlier movies.
Absolutely. Oh, they're both amazing actors.
It's so cool to see him as a villain and then go see him as Remus.
Exactly.
Who's kind of like half villain in Prisoner of Azkaban, but he's also dealing with being a werewolf.
Exactly.
Like he's also a good person. It's cool to see the change, how he can play both roles.
Exactly. And we have the mixed, the unclear intentions essentially when we get to the end at the Shrieking Shack. But anyway, David Thewlis, amazing. Jason Isaacs, awesome.
Dennis Quaid. I think he was great in this movie. I don't even care. He's so fun. Dennis
Quaid is, I think, to me, very much of the 90s.
Yes.
And I don't know what accent he was trying to do.
It was his, just more deep.
He was articulating words a little bit more, and I'm like, he's not doing like any type of accent.
He's just doing his voice, but more stern and with more bravado.
Exactly.
Like empowering,
Yeah. I think it was an endearing character for him to play because he does have that smug, kind of cool, not too old, but like older dude feel. But he also is quite convincing as a strong character, not just a smug and playful one as well. It just threw me off with his hair.
I dug it. The armor and everything. All the armor looked great.
What is your thought on medieval fantasy? Like Arthurian style medieval fantasy?
So I think with that question, I think it goes into our discussion of good versus evil. And I think the medieval movies and how they portray them, like Quest for Camelot, it's simple storytelling, good versus
Yeah.
evil, sword versus sword,
Yep.
king versus, say, a village. The storytelling that anybody can kind of dive into. And I love medieval movies like that because it's so simple and
Yeah.
they're always grounded and there's nothing crazy happening. And it's always, tyranny versus the underdog.
Exactly. Yeah. For me, I agree with all of that in terms of the story. For some reason, I cannot get behind Arthurian medieval fantasy. It just doesn't click for me. Like, I love the Lord of the Rings. I love the idea of Game of Thrones and Wheel of Time, like all of these aged timelines, period things. But when it comes to like medieval fantasy, I just don't like it. But it's not to say that I don't like the story. I love the story. I thought it was really, really good. But putting me in that setting, I'm just like, I don't know. But the dragons are cool.
Yeah, the dragon, you can't not knock a dragon in a movie.
Exactly. It's like,
anytime there's a dragon when I was young, I was like, give me those movies.
You give me more of those. Did they ever have any like McDonald's promotions for Dragonheart?
I have no idea.
Oh, I have I picture.
I guarantee they probably did.
One of those like rolling back ones, and it goes forward or it shoots fire,
or
something
like it has
that.
You click the back of its head and it shoots the flame.
Exactly.
I don't know if there was any toys or anything for this movie. I think because it was too much of it wasn't aimed for kids. It was one of those like Jurassic Park vibes where everybody can see it. I don't think it was marketed where they would make toys off of this.
Yeah. It feels right in the middle, like not too young, but not super, super old either.
Like you could get behind it at age 9 or 10.
Yeah.
But I don't think you could get someone to watch it who's younger because they kill a lot of people in this movie.
They do.
Like it's not physically, you don't see a lot.
No.
Like you just know that's what's happening because it's usually they're swinging a sword, but they're behind the person they're killing. So you're not physically seeing, but there is a lot of like impalement.
Yes. Well, Kara does one near the end where they're sieging the castle and she has that big like dragon axe.
Yeah.
And she slices a guy like in the lower regions.
Yeah.
And then she pulls the axe away and there's no blood on it. I'm like, okay, this is definitely a safe for kids, but still pretty suggestive of violence.
Blood when they need to.
Exactly.
But I think diving into 12 years later when he is now a tyrant king.
Yeah.
And he has the entire village slaved to build his new kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, Dennis Quaid, he is engulfed with vengeance because he thinks the dragon, the heart of the dragon, turned his new king, who he spent his entire life training to be a noble one, evil. So now he is hunting the dragons. And what I think is cool is the twist at the beginning when he goes to kill the first dragon we see him.
Yeah.
And we get introduced to Brother Gilbert.
Yes.
Who's one of my favorite characters in the movie. He's a poet. The writing for him is clean. He's got amazing poems. He's on the edge of his own seat because he's riding his donkey, but he's also running around following Bowen. In his poems, he's constantly trying to figure out a better way to write his poem, so his lines are constantly changing.
Yes.
And it's so clever. But he kills the first dragon. We think, okay, that looks a lot like the dragon we had a hint of in the castle. Beginning. But then we find out, say, 10 minutes later that Draco is still alive.
Yeah. When Gilbert was on the rocks by the river.
Yes. That's so cool.
It was great. I was confused, though. Because the rocks are essentially like light gray.
Yes.
And then they stir, and then we see the dragon go into the waterfall. I, for some reason, thought it was a different dragon, but it was Draco, right?
Yes.
I'm not.
It was
okay.
Draco.
Okay.
Yeah, they can camouflage.
Right. I didn't know that.
He was
I didn't get that at first.
He was hanging out there, which I think this is when we go back to practical.
Yep.
Because the setting is all real.
Yeah.
they have the waterfall. They picked beautiful landscapes to film in the first place, but then they built all the rocks and they built the formation of rocks to look like a dragon.
Yes.
And then Brother Gilbert gets on top and he's writing his poems and he stabs him in the head with his quill to get his quill going. And then Bowen, he's chilling in the water thinking that Draco is inside the waterfall.
Yep.
Where they would hide. And then you see Draco's eye open up after he gets poked in the head and he's like, whoa, and he shakes him down. And then Bowen looks away and then he closes his eye again.
Yeah.
He shakes off Brother Gilbert and then he like runs into the
waterfall.
All the tail, I guarantee you, was real going into the waterfall because they used that shot twice.
Yes.
And because I bet you it was mechanical, so they couldn't get that much water on it. So they had one shot to get it.
Yep.
Of it swinging to disappear into the waterfall because they used it twice in the movie. But I don't know if you noticed it, but they used that same shot twice.
Where was it in the second time?
The second time was when Bowen fights Einan in the water. When he's talking with Kara and Draco after they rescue Kara from the village and they go back to that waterfall and they're having a discussion. Oh. And then Bowen comes in and he's like, I've been waiting for you. I was supposed to, because at that point they're in cahoots together.
Yes.
To try to get more gold.
Yes.
He said then Draco disappears into the waterfall because he says he's coming and Einan shows up and they have that duel.
Yeah. That's the same shot.
It's the same shot.
Definitely.
But you wouldn't have noticed because it's say like 45 minutes later.
Exactly. And that's honestly smart use of takes.
Yes.
Like why not? I didn't notice it. Like you got to really
it 10 times. So
yeah. You pick up on those things.
But I only noticed it on my recent watch.
Oh, okay.
So there you go.
Yeah. And once they kind of when Bowen and Draco have their exchange at the waterfall, we see Draco come out of the waterfall and like fly away.
In full. This is the first time we see him in full.
Yes. And that was such a good shot. That was... You kind of get that rush of excitement. You're like, oh, I actually get to see him now because it's been what 20.
I think 20 some minutes. Yeah. You saw him only in the shadows at the beginning.
Exactly.
So you only saw like a little bit of reflection off the fire with him inside the castle.
Exactly.
And it was all in shadow. So this is the first full
big
in
reveal.
The sunlight.
Yes.
By the way.
And this is, I think, where the visual effects really shine because daytime shots for fantastical things are hard to do, especially back then.
Which is why movies now still refuse to do them.
Exactly.
It's like we can put an example, Godzilla. They always throw him at night because it's easier to make him look good.
Exactly.
Which I don't understand because the shots we see of him in the daytime look incredible.
Exactly.
But I just think it's more budget to make it look that good.
Exactly. Yeah.
They should do more in the daylight.
I agree. Because, it's clarity for us, right? Now we know this is going to be a central character. We should see him in the daylight. We should have a full understanding of what he looks like, how he functions. And I think we get that in this movie. We get him in the water. We get him on land. We get him flying. We get him in so many variable circumstances. And you actually feel like you understand that this is like a creature in the world. It's not something too mysterious anymore.
This movie really makes you feel like dragons and humans work together.
Yes.
Like where Game of Thrones, on the other hand, they had dragons as companions, but it wasn't as fantastical as the dragons spoke to them.
Right.
They knew who their owner was and they fought by their side, but it wasn't as close. I mean, if this dragon didn't speak, it'd be a lot harder to get across in the 90s that they were a companion. So I think it was great to have him have dialogue.
And I think the character really came to life because of Sean Connery. He has that wit. He's a little smug.
He's got the charm.
He does.
Because a couple of times when he was talking to Kara, he turned on the flirty Sean Connery.
Of course, yeah.
And what I think this movie does really well is balance the seriousness of Einan and the battle that's happening with the playful, fun side of Draco and Bowen's relationship.
Right.
Because the score in this movie, to me, is absolutely incredible. So, and as soon as I turned the movie on, I got brought right back. Yeah. It's one of those, it feels like it's like a John Williams kind of vibe.
Right.
It's very
bouncy,
uplifting. When they're playing, like not playing, when they're going toe to toe with each other
Yes.
but like in a friendly state. They always have that like uplifting kind of dancey,
Yes.
fun, magical score. But then there's the battle score, and then there's the overall theme. I just think
Yes.
they nailed the music in this movie.
For me, I guess I should say, when I watch a movie for the first time, it's hard for me to pick up on all of the different things, but I did hear a couple of those moments, especially when it was light, like lighthearted. I really thought that the music added to that. I don't think I've ever heard of the composer for this movie, and I'm like, they did a great job.
Yes. But I don't think I've ever heard, because I've seen it a lot, so I know the score just off by heart. I don't think I've ever heard this score kind of replicated. I think it's very original for a movie like this with a dragon and knights.
It almost sounded like, when I listened to it, I felt like I heard it before. But that's a sign of it being a good score.
Right.
It's comfortable. It's supposed to be there, and it's relatively familiar. It's not throwing you out to left field trying to understand what's going on. It's supporting the movie well.
Yes.
Kind of going back to that idea of good and evil, since we had those contrasts between Bowen and Draco, and contrasting it to King Einan, how do you feel they executed that in this movie?
I think the overall aspect of Bowen and Draco's relationship evolved really well, because he was after Draco for a good, say, 15, 20 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
And they had that kind of playful exchange where Bowen was on his horse, but then he got shoved off his horse and he was dragging him through the forest. But Draco was giving him these sarcastic remarks as it was happening. But the scene, I think, changed for them was when Bowen was stuck inside of Draco's mouth.
Yeah.
And they had, I think if it was done any other way, I don't think it would have worked, because they had like 7 hours of sitting. He was sitting in Draco's mouth. So they had this time to talk and discuss. And it's like, listen, we're not going to best each other, so we might as well talk about it.
Yes.
Okay, I'll let you go, and I'll remove my sword from inside of your mouth.
Yep.
And then eventually Draco kicks him out of his mouth with his tongue.
Yep.
Claws him with his hand, and then they have this back and forth discussion. Okay, we're going to have a truce, and now we're going to understand who the real enemy is.
Right.
So I think if it was just a really quick exchange of Draco saying, "Oh, I was the dragon that did this," but then that would have kind of made Bowen. But because they had that like 7 hours of sitting and having a conversation in the most uncomfortable circumstance,
yep,
I think that was more believable to eventually start growing, because it wasn't immediate.
No.
Right. It was after the campfire they had where they were going back and forth, and then Draco started to rain. So it was because they weren't immediately friends. Even in that scene, it took a couple more scenes where they started to grow on each other.
Yes.
So I think their relationship was built very well. And in terms of Einan, he was just the perfect villain.
Yeah, he was.
He was sinister. He was evil.
Yep.
He didn't even care about he killed his mom in this movie.
Yeah, with the spear.
Yeah, with the spear.
Wild.
And you could tell, because even the mother didn't approve of the boy she now witnessed.
Yep.
Because she hired the dragon slayers to kill Draco. But then we realized after that moment, if Draco dies, his son dies.
Yeah.
She knows.
Yeah.
And he just played it where he was smug.
Uh-huh.
When Kara tried to invade the castle to kill him, he was just like, nope, now you're my prisoner. He was even physical with his own people.
Yeah. He was going to make her his wife.
Yes. Yeah. He didn't
By
care.
Force. Like,
he is a product of his father's
madness. Yeah.
Yes.
I love the idea of just a straight up villain sometimes, And
his motives were pure.
Yeah.
Like, you understood exactly why he was the villain, because who he came from, and he just wanted power. But again, the actor just brought it.
Yeah. He knew that there were no real redeeming qualities of him. We as I think the viewer want to hope so, that he might turn the other cheek at the end of the day, but he's leaning fully into the tyranny, the madness, the wickedness that his father showed as well.
And the scene that makes that work is when we see him versus Bowen for the first time as adults in the waterfall, in the lake, going back and forth with their anger towards each other, and Bowen saying, "I trained you. I made you follow the old code. And then when it cuts back to Einan and he says, I don't care about the old code. I used you to learn how to fight, and then Bowen, distraught, he goes right for him and they go do battle. Then he, stabs Bowen in the shoulder, and then Draco has to intervene.
Yep.
And then at that point, Bowen's, why are you even here? Who told you to interfere? I had everything under control. Yeah. So it was a great student-teacher relationship at the beginning, building towards how disappointed and hurt Bowen was that Einan still turned out like his father.
Right. There are a couple of things that I want to bring up for this. One, throughout most of the movie, I was still convinced that Einan would turn. And I think it's because his mom was still there as a presence. Right. There was always something grounding him to what was before, because she essentially enlisted Bowen as his teacher, his mentor, right? And she trusted Bowen to be there. Throughout the movie, she's technically still there. She's alive. But as soon as he kills her, I'm like, oh, no, he's fully 100% just an evil character. I was like, but it's so close to the end.
Yeah, there was like 5 to 10 minutes left.
Exactly. But for me, that was satisfying because you're waiting and waiting and waiting. You're like, please, like, have a change of heart. And then you realize, oh, he's lost entirely. It was great.
Now, do you think, because you've only watched this movie now, do you believe recent movies have made you believe? Because I feel majority of movies nowadays, they make villains out to be, you have to understand them.
Yeah.
And that somehow they're the good guy at the end. They either come around or you make the audience feel like they're not a villain.
Right.
So you're going back to a movie in the 90s where villains were just villains.
Right.
You still had that kind of belief that, oh, maybe
bad is
they're going to swing this where he's actually going to redeem himself instead of just being a villain, because most of the time back in the day when we were kids, villains were just villains.
Right.
And it was a great time.
You're right. I probably have a little bit of that modern movie sensibility bias in, well, the storytelling sensibilities, in that character is a little bit more complex than he really is.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, looking back on the movie, you're like, oh man, he's just a big old D.
He's just evil.
He's just bad.
You can be just evil.
Exactly.
And the movie plays well into just being evil.
Exactly. And I don't think it would have done the movie any good for him to turn.
Especially that late in the game.
Exactly.
You've done all this tyranny throughout the whole movie.
Yeah.
And now you're all of a sudden just going to change.
Yeah.
Like, your mother didn't make you change for 30 years of your life. You're not going to change just because.
Yeah. Like if anything, for that to have worked, he would have had to kill his mother way early on, and then had this crushing realization that he's, not his father, but it would have ended up essentially tearing him apart to the point where he probably still would have died.
Yeah. He was dying either way.
Exactly. But I think for the time that this was written, this is how it should have gone, right? Mm-hmm. It didn't need to have any other embellishment on his character. He's a bad dude. That's it. Yeah. and I loved it. I think he was one of the strongest characters. He was a strong villain in general. I think Draco and Bowen were strong characters because they both grew to accept each other and to accept like their fates. Bowen in terms of him sacrificing his friend, and Draco for essentially fulfilling what he was set out to do. I found it interesting though with Draco. It's a very like religious thing. He did this. He gave half of his heart to Einan to save him, to essentially save a spot for him up in the stars. Right? Is that like, that's kind of how I got it?
Because here's the thing. I was going to bring that up really soon, because at the middle of the movie, when him and Bowen were sitting by the fire after they have their head to head with him stuck inside Draco's mouth. Yeah. He talks about the stars and how all the great dragons go to the stars because there's a formation that looks like a dragon. Yeah. And I don't think he did the ceremony of granting Einan his heart in order to go up to the stars. Uh-huh. I think because there was good inside of Draco to be, I would hope that my heart would change him.
Right.
He hadn't done anything at that point as a dragon worthy of being a great dragon.
Right.
So in time of, I think it could be that way where he would hope to go to the stars, because at that point he wanted to go to the stars to be with his ancestors.
Yeah.
But I think in hoping that he would help turn an evil king, he would get there easier.
Yes. Yeah. So
Right.
it wasn't entirely selfish. Sorry, I wouldn't say selfish. It wasn't entirely self-motivated. It was with the intent of sparing a kingdom a bad king.
Yes, because
Right?
without his sacrifice, it wouldn't have mattered regardless, because his heart didn't change him. So he had to make the sacrifice to save a whole kingdom.
Right. Right. No,
And
that's
if he didn't go to the stars, the movie wouldn't have had a good arc for Draco anyway.
Exactly. Exactly. That would have been silly. He's like,
Because Bowen was, what do I do now without you? And Draco says, you just look to the stars. And that's how he fades off into his spirit and he goes into the sky, just like they talked about in the middle of the movie.
yep.
So there's full character moments for every single character in this. Bowen goes to see King Arthur and he gets a reassurance of the old code and that he is worthy of the code.
Yeah.
And he knows his place as a knight.
Yep.
And he knows his relationship with Draco, and Draco knows the sacrifice he must make, even at the beginning when he first meets Bowen. He knows the king is still evil,
Yeah.
and the only way to stop the king is for him to die.
Right. It's Bowen's story is essentially challenging his beliefs and putting his strength and will to the test. And then his reassurance at King Arthur's grave was that flip in the story to say, my conviction is true and I'm on the right path.
Yeah.
And that was cool. So, okay, question regarding the visual effects for the King Arthur in the rain on the pillar. Was that a real statue, or was that
it was 100% a real statue.
Yeah.
I think they just, the way they filmed it, because they had the circle of pillars, I think they switched one of them out. It was definitely all like foam.
Yeah. Yes.
But painted to look like stone. They just switched it out and then lit it in a certain way where King Arthur would show up. Because after he faded away, it was just a regular pillar.
Right.
So it was just a trick of just swapping pillars out. Because there's no way they would just composite. They have so much work with the dragon. They're not going to... They built every single set. They're not going to say, oh, we'll skimp out on this one that looks like King Arthur. We'll just do it in post. No, they built it 100%.
For sure. Yeah, that was a cool shot. I like that one. And the big floodlight at the back of the pillar.
Yeah.
That I love that shot. And everything, it's all in the rain. It was a great one.
Yeah.
It was so good.
Because at that point, Draco goes with Kara to recruit the village, but then he returns because he knows Bowen needs him at this point.
Yes.
To be in the round table.
Right. Yeah, that was interesting because I thought, oh, why is he leaving? Like, I get that they have to go recruit the villagers. That's what Kara and Draco believe is the right thing to do, but they're just gonna leave him there.
Yeah.
Like,
well, Draco knew he needed his time.
Yeah. It's almost like give him a little bit of a break.
Yeah.
Let him think about it and he'll come around. Mm-hmm. So once Bowen realizes he's on the right path, he goes with Draco and Kara to the village and starts recruiting them. And this is the point where I was like, this is a cool character.
Can we talk about the scene that's basically on the cover of the VHS?
Yes, exactly.
After that point, they go to the village and he's riding his horse.
Yes.
A beautiful amber sunset.
Yes.
Or sunrise. Over the hill.
Yeah.
And he pulls up his horse right into the middle of frame, and then Draco rises up from the mountain behind him. Or the hill behind him. And it's a beautiful shot.
It's so
which
good.
Kicks off their bond.
Yes.
Essentially. Because before that, they were always button heads back and forth. Yep. And they always thought different things. But I think at that moment, they were a knight and a dragon as one.
Yeah. They were synced together.
Yeah.
They had the same mission, the same purpose. I loved that whole bit because it reminded me of the end of The Return of the King in Lord of the Rings, where Aragorn is going back and forth along the battle lines when they're at the gates of Mordor. And I'm like, well, this is so cool. Like
Yeah.
he's rallying the villagers. They're just villagers. They're not fighters. They're not warriors. But he's getting them. He's inspiring them to stand up, and they all back him. They're all ready to go. And that shot with the hill and the dragon. Oh, it's just so good.
This is backlit too.
Exactly.
So it's like all silhouette, but you can see through his wings a little bit with the red.
Yeah. There's no way nobody would like be inspired by that.
Yeah.
Such a good shot.
And the battle between village and kingdom,
Yeah,
I think was a great battle.
it
In
was.
the middle of the forest, they had a plan because they met the kingdom in the middle of an open field and then retreated into the forest where they basically did the 300,
Yes.
where they put all their spears together in a line. But then Bowen had everybody lined up in the trees for the archers. And then they set the fire, which is cool because it was real fire.
Yes, of course.
They have to. They streamed a whole ring of fire around so they could fight all the battles between characters. There was weight to them because a lot of people were dying.
Yes.
The
yeah.
weapons looked heavy.
They did. And Gilbert was up in the trees with his bow, who is apparently a good shot.
Yeah, he's a great shot.
And he's holding off because he's a priest, right?
Why waste resources
Yeah.
on a bad shot? I also think he was contemplating am I going to actually kill somebody?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, he's a priest, right?
Yes.
So he doesn't want to kill anybody. Who was he saving at the point where he shot the guy in the butt?
I think he was saving Bowen, or it could have been Kara, but then he says, "Turn the other cheek, brother."
Yeah.
He has so many good lines in this movie.
And it's all kind of justified at that point for him, right? So I liked that a lot. And that was the cool thing about that fight. It was heavy because, yeah, there were a lot of people dying, and there's fire and clashing metal. And then there's a couple lighthearted points to it, and it's not overdone. There were essentially 2 jokes throughout that entire scene.
And it's within character.
Exactly. No, that was really, really well done.
I love the shot of Einan jumping horse through the fire.
Yes.
It was so cool. They did it. Obviously, there was no fire in the middle because they would have shut that part off. But towards the camera, it looked like he just hopped through the fire.
Exactly. No, it was
the straight angle they did.
Yeah, it looked seamless.
Yeah.
It was great. That was so cool.
And then this is when Brother Gilbert shoots Einan with the arrow. And that's when Draco falls from the sky into the kingdom. And that's when he gets captured.
That's right.
Because we find earlier in the film when Kara hurts Einan in the kingdom after he has her prisoner, and then Draco and Bowen are in the forest, and he falls over, and he has the searing pain in his shoulder.
Yes.
When Bowen puts the blanket over top of him, that's when we realize that they both feel their pain.
Yes, they have that physical bond between them.
Draco goes down, he gives the roar, and Bowen panics
he knows something's wrong.
He knows something is wrong, and they go storm the castle because Einan calls for retreat.
The castle siege was great.
Yeah,
I loved it. I was actually very into it at that point. At first, nobody was going. None of the villagers were going. Bowen was just said, "We gotta go to the castle," and everybody
who's coming with me.
Yeah, and then Kara steps up. They leave. Gilbert follows, and nobody else is seemingly coming. They're essentially worn out from this battle. How could they possibly stand to fight anymore?
Right.
But then we get into the castle and we have a close quarters fight between Einan and Bowen.
In the underneath of the castle.
Yes.
I love the underneath of the castle with the little stream and the secret hatch. It was a great fight.
I was worried that the choreography wouldn't be too great, but it was solid.
It was classic sword fighting.
It was.
Nice sword fighting.
Yep. They were swinging seemingly heavy-ish swords.
Yes, and using the hilt as like a defense to push swords off.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was great.
Yep. And you heard like the clank against the walls when it hit. It was it felt real. It felt like there were stakes because of these close quarters.
And because Einan is such a villain that he just wants to kill Bowen.
Yeah.
So he's not going to hold back because that's his teacher. He's just going to finish him off because he just wants to rule his kingdom.
Exactly.
The fight, I love that the fight traveled.
Yes.
And it wasn't just it was in, the bedroom. at first, and then he kicked Einon down below where we were talking about the underneath of the castle, and they went up on top of the castle, and that's when it was almost clumsy in a way where Bowen kind of swung himself around and then Einon fell off the castle.
Yeah,
But you know he wasn't going to die because Draco was still alive.
Exactly. And Bowen thought he was, right?
Yes, but Draco says he's still coming, like, because at that point it was just Kara coming down the stairs and he thought it was Einon, but then Einon came out from another corner.
Yes. It was cool when they did the double take of her coming down. They go back to Bowen and Draco and she's still okay. And then they go back to them and then Einon catches her. Because I thought, oh, maybe she's good. Maybe he's going to come up some other way. But no, he has her. And that's when Draco bites his hand.
Yeah.
To get him to drop the blade.
Yeah, to feel pain.
I loved it.
Cool.
It's so good.
The connection between Draco and Einon was a very good storyline in terms of it wasn't because plot he dropped the knife.
Right.
It was because Draco knows his weakness.
Yes.
And this is the only way for him to be at a disadvantage.
Yeah. It was a thoughtful use of their connection, right?
Because they only did it like 4 times in the movie.
Yep.
They didn't overdo the Draco's hurt, so Einon's hurt. They did it like once for Einon being stabbed, and then we realized Draco feels Einon's pain, which was the first time, and then they kind of did it in the middle of battle, and then for Draco to help Bowen.
Right.
And then we get the charge of Einon towards Bowen to kill him, and then Bowen gives the old swing of the axe and just ends Draco because he peels his heart up, his scales up to reveal his heart, and then they go down both at the same time.
That was a good shot. And David Thewlis did a good death.
He was great in this whole movie.
Yeah. Top to bottom, so good.
So I have a lot of nostalgia to why I love this movie. And you said there was parts that you didn't feel were as strong for you. So what do you think overall of the movie for a first time viewing in 2023 compared to 1996?
So as a 30-year-old watching a movie from 1996 about medieval dragon fantasy, who still enjoys lighthearted movies? I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good take, especially for its time. It wasn't goofy. It wasn't a goofy movie.
No.
The story, aside from its casting of Draco and Einon, was very strong. Was the strongest part of it, because the story is a simple good versus evil with a twist connection between the protagonist and the antagonist, and a decision to be made by our hero at the end of the day. Overall, I thought it was a very fun movie, and I feel like it has pretty much the story itself has held up.
Yes, majority of Draco I think holds up. There's some scenes that obviously look like it's CG, but they did a great job mixing the two because of the real plates they shot.
Yes,
for the land and the scenery.
And he didn't look out of place, like you said, in the scenery. It actually felt like he was there. Not like other CG movies where
one person on a green screen and the whole thing is CG.
Exactly. And the lighting was pretty consistent for him, so he looked like he belonged in whatever shot they were doing. If it was bright, there was a light source from above, and it was
the shadows.
It was
like
diffused.
His casting shadows on the land, or even when he's flying over water, you see his shadow in the water.
Yeah, his shadows were the right color. Right? They weren't black as black compared to the grayish shadows of the sunny day. They were the same, and it felt pretty real, right?
Yeah.
And that's all you could want essentially for a movie from way back then. Like, it looked great.
I would say there's only a couple moments where in the middle where I felt it dragged when they were kind of just going back and forth with each other, trying to get all the gold. I think they did that one too many times. I think the one time they had to do it in order to show that Bowen and Draco are in cahoots with each other.
Right.
For a fun, playful twist. But then the one, I think there was 2 more after that, but the one where he fell into the water, but he couldn't sink. And like there was an exchange between the village people and like they were going to kill Bowen and them. And I think they kind of dragged just a smidge I think this movie's like 96 minutes or 100 minutes.
Yeah.
If you would have cut 5 minutes off that one sequence, it would have kind of flowed more into the banter between Einon and Bowen. and
Exactly.
their stakes together. But other than that, I think it flows really well for a movie in the 90s. Like we talked about with Indian in the Cupboard.
Yeah.
All these movies in the 90s, they know how to write a simple story that doesn't take too long.
Exactly. And there's not a lot of dragging bits to it.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that scene, the whole con artist storyline. It was fine, but yeah, they could have chopped a little bit off of it.
Yeah.
Other than that, it still served a relatively good purpose. But I think looking at it from your perspective, who has seen it many times, especially as a kid, I get why this movie is as special as it is for you. It's relatively timeless. Like it's a great story. It's got great visual effects, and it's got a dragon in it.
Got a dragon who has a great personality.
Yes.
But his voice is believable.
It is.
It's not.
It really is.
They don't just give anybody that role.
Yeah. You actually
Like
had
nowadays, they would cast the same actor for everything. They probably cast Chris Pratt. He's in everything nowadays, you know.
Oh, but we actually had a Scottish actor play him, and it suited the role really well.
And yes, he was very famous for the time, but it suited the era of which this movie took place.
Exactly.
So with that, I want to thank everybody for listening. Hope you enjoyed our little rehash of a 1996 classic, Dragonheart. Yeah. It was great to have your first viewing and my probably 10th viewing look at this movie. And I hope you enjoyed watching it for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot of fun. And I hope whoever hasn't seen it can enjoy it again. And whoever hasn't seen it can watch it and have some similar thoughts to us and enjoy it just as much.
This has been 2 Hours on a Sunday. I'm Brian.
I'm Nick.
And we'll catch you guys later.
Bye.